In the small hours of March the 11th, 2012, US guards at Camp Belamby heard gunshots ring out across the night air. Over the next few hours, the shots continued between intervals. In the following days, it would be discovered that 16 Afghan civilians, including children, were murdered in the Panjwayi district of Kandahar province, Afghanistan, that night by US Staff Sergeant Robert Bales. The horrific display of violence and terror would come to be known as the Kandahar Massacre, and Bales would find himself in prison shortly after confessing and pleading guilty to all charges. Bales was a married father of two with a good military record. While he'd participated in a few petty scraps with civilians, there was nothing in his life to indicate that he might carry out such a brutal and disturbing crime. He was described as an ordinary man who seemed to try to do the right thing. He was well liked, popular in his youth, and happy to make time for those who needed him. So what happened to Robert Bales that made him choose this path of destruction? In this documentary, we aim to shed light on this question and more, as we examine the horrific story of Robert Bales and the Kandahar Massacre. Robert Bales was born on June 30th, 1973 in Norwood, a suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio. The youngest of 5 boys, the children lived with their parents in a 2-story brick home known locally as the Bales house, even after the family moved out. By all accounts, the Bales family were well liked and well respected in their community. As a teenager, Bales was described as talkative, bright, well-mannered and engaged. He was never too busy to make time for friends, strived to always make the right decisions, and was admired by other neighborhood children. Bales was a popular boy in his youth who enjoyed all sorts of activities, including sports and theatre. He played on the school football team as a middle linebacker, known for being strong, even if he was not particularly big. In his second to last year of school, though, Bales was politely removed from his position so that a new student could take it. Though Bales had every right to be upset by the decision the team's coach made, he took it in his stride and shared some tips with the newcomer to help him with his new role. This student, notably, was Mark Edwards, who went on to play in the NFL between 1997 and 2005. Edwards' biographer noted that Bales got the idea in that situation that Mark was going to be better for the team. He also added that Edwards credited Bale with helping him to become a better player. He credited Bob Bales with teaching him what leadership meant and how to handle a situation that doesn't favour you. In his yearbook, Bales signed the football team photo with the nickname Doom. His former principal stated, "He's one of those kids you remember, a real extrovert." After finishing high school, Bales attended the College of Mount St. Joseph between 1991 and 1992. In 1993, he enrolled at Ohio State University, where he began studying economics. However, in 1996, he left abruptly without graduating. It's unclear why he never returned to complete his education. According to a 2012 article from the New York Times, the specifics of Bales' life over the next few years are unknown. Friends claim that after leaving university, he began working in financial services in Columbia, Ohio, before moving to Florida and starting up an investment business with one of his brothers, as well as former football teammate Mark Edwards. The company, named Spartina Investments, was based in Doral, Florida, as the trio leased an office there just blocks away from the Miami International Airport. According to reporters in March 2012, though, there was no sign that the business was still going, and it was found to have been dissolved by the state in 2000 after the company had failed to file its annual report on time. A spokeswoman for Mark Edwards later stated, "The business relationship was brief and limited. It ended as a result of marketplace forces and other issues. In an article by Business Week, however, more particulars are given. Bales began his investment career in 1996, the same year that he left university and moved to Florida. In the subsequent months, he became employed by 5 different companies, all of which were related to one another, sharing employees and offices. Public filings showed that Bales was registered to sell investments with these companies. Before long, though, Bales and one of the firms he worked for, Michael Patterson Incorporated, was soon accused of engaging in fraudulent security activities. One complaint alleged that Bales had participated in unauthorized trading, though Bales argued that his employer, Michael Patterson, was the one responsible for the trades, which were carried out after he had left the company. Bales noted that Patterson had told the elderly client that Bales would be responsible for them. Notably, records showed that in 2012, Patterson was barred from dealing with securities in Ohio. In relation to this case, in 2003, Patterson and Bales were hit with a $1.5 million arbitration ruling in which Bales was charged with fraud, unauthorized trading, and breach of responsibility. The couple, though, never received their money as Bales had never any to give, and no action was made to revoke his broker's license. An article from Bloomberg reports that the couple was swindled out of more than $600,000 from their retirement savings. Another of the companies Bale worked for, Hamilton Share, was described as a pump and dump operation, one of many that sprang up in the 1990s in Florida. The salesmen employed by this sort of enterprise would sell low stocks, which would in turn boost the prices, allowing them to dump their own shares and make a huge profit. Hamilton Share would later be accused of ignoring client complaints, offering misleading information, failing to regulate and verify its staff's credentials, and opting not to supervise its own brokers. In 1999, Hamilton Share was selling cheap stock for a medical device company that was later found to be selling black market products and overbidding the government for reimbursements. Hamilton Share was charged and eventually filed for bankruptcy protection. The lawsuit against them was ultimately dropped, and few further details in the case are known. In 2001, 3 principals of the company were charged with federal criminal fraud. One of them served 5 years in prison for mail fraud, while the 2 others served a year and a day for conspiracy. Notably, by the time the decision was made to begin to settle the dispute between Bales and the elderly clients who'd accused him of destroying their holdings, he was already out of the country. In late 2001, following the September 11th attacks, Bales decided to join the military, leaving the investment business altogether. He claimed that the 9/11 attacks had inspired him to serve his country, but several friends theorized that he simply hated to see his clients lose money, so he decided to find a new way to support himself. He was noted to be aimless and dispirited during this time, searching for something to give him purpose. A neighbor who'd watched Bales grow up recalled being concerned by his decision to join the military and worried that he was putting his life in danger. Her son, who had idolized Bales since childhood, stated that Bales had to join because he takes care of everybody. Mark Edwards recalled, "He said, I gotta make something right." Joining the military and fighting for our country was his way of vindicating himself to a certain degree. Bales was 27 when he joined the army, and he was quickly found to be a strong and likable individual. He drew respect from his peers for his level-headedness and maturity, even in the thick of battle. A soldier who served with Bales in Iraq in 2007 noted, "He was a damn good leader and a damn good soldier." Following basic training, Bales was assigned to what was then known as Fort Lewis, today called the Joint Base Lewis-McChord near Tacoma, Washington, where he was keen to be deployed. His career would span over a decade, and he spent this time with the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Infantry Regiment in a striker brigade. But it wasn't all smooth sailing for Bales from here on out. In 2002, he was accused of assaulting a security guard at the Silver Dollar Casino in Tacoma and subsequently charged with the crime. The lawyer he obtained in 2012 following the Kandahar Massacre told the media that the violence had broken out following a disagreement Bales had had with a woman who was another customer at the casino. At around 1 a.m. on July 14th, 2002, he'd been drinking at the casino bar when he threatened another customer. When he was asked to leave, he refused, and he was then physically escorted outside. He attacked the security guard with a garbage lid before hitting him in the chest with his fist. After the incident, Bales was charged with a misdemeanor. He represented himself in court, paid a $300 fine, and agreed to undergo 20 hours of anger management counseling, which, by all accounts, he appears to have completed. In 2003, Bales met Carrie Primo while at a bar. According to Carrie, the pair danced and flirted all night, but he made her aware that he was being deployed to Iraq in a month. She initially considered extracting herself from the blossoming romance, later recalling, "You want somebody who's going to be around, but we had a spark." She described Bales as being full of enthusiasm and excitement. He enjoyed telling her what he was learning about military life, war, and how to wage it. Despite the fact that Bales was shipped off to Iraq in November, the couple kept in touch, and although the distance was difficult, their relationship grew more and more serious as the months passed. Carrie would later be remembered as an avid cyclist by neighbours, who noted that she wasn't particularly social. She was also a blogger who discussed cookie recipes, favourite books, and the life of a military wife on her blog. Bales' first deployment involved many gunfights, according to reports, as the country spiraled into chaos. He later recounted the trip and his first major firefight, which occurred in Mosul, to Brendan Vaughan, a writer for GQ. Though he was a meticulous and prepared officer, later known for his ability to distinguish the bad guys from the non-combatants, he found his first venture into the chaos of war to be quite overwhelming. The first time you engage, I hate to say it, but you kind of spray bullets everywhere because you're scared. You're hyped up. It's for real. Later, that goes away. You start to control your breathing, start to calm down. You know what you're looking at and what's going on. You've been there. You've done it. But your first firefight is a pretty big deal. While he would sometimes be in charge of driving their armoured vehicle, called the Striker, Bales was more often than not a gun team leader on combat patrol. Bales returned home from his first deployment in November 2004, and 5 months later, he married Carrie. The couple would later have 2 children together. Despite the new developments in his personal life, Bales declined to take time off from his work to bask in it. Instead, he continued to prepare for his next deployment, staying at the base for over 12 hours every day. Carrie recalled on some nights she'd wake up from a nightmare, afraid that someone had broken into the house. Ever diligent, Bales would leap out of bed armed with his gun and carry out a full patrol of the house, including going outside and doing a lap of the perimeter. At the time, Carrie thought that this was just the way he did things as a devoted husband and soldier. But looking back, she wonders if it was the beginning of Bales' paranoia, brought on by his stints away from home. Carrie also became aware that Bales liked to drink. Initially, it always seemed in good fun. It was something he did with friends and he seemed to enjoy himself. But upon his return to the US, she grew concerned that drinking had become a crutch, a coping mechanism he required in order to function, having seen the horrors of war in Iraq. She recalled he would go out and sit on the deck and have a cigar because that was something they did in Iraq. He'd listen to his music, and you knew that he was dealing with all that he had seen. She added that though she tried to approach him and speak with him, she knew he liked to be alone during these times. You could just tell that he was dealing with things that were dark things. He didn't really open up a whole lot about those things. After his 2012 arrest, records would reveal that Bales had a long history of issues with alcohol. In 1998, he received a citation in Florida for having alcohol on a beach. In 2002, there was the drunken scrap with the bodyguard in Tacoma. In 2005, he was arrested for drunk driving. In 2008, he got into another drunken altercation outside a bowling alley, and that same year, he reportedly fell asleep at the wheel and rolled his car before abandoning the vehicle and running into the woods. A witness saw a man in military uniform, bleeding and with a shaved head, running from the scene in Sumner, Washington. In the bowling alley case, Bales was observed as being severely intoxicated. He was described as staggering around with glassy eyes, smelling of alcohol, and his speech was slurred. He approached a woman standing with her boyfriend outside of the establishment and told her she was beautiful. The woman reported, and then he grabbed my hand and put it on his crotch. Then my boyfriend said, "You owe her an apology for that. That was rude." He wouldn't do it, and the next thing I know, he was kicking my boyfriend. He got him on the ground and started to wail on him. After security guards broke up the fight, Bales' friends reportedly appeared and begged the woman not to file a charge. claiming it would really ruin his life. The woman filed the report anyway, but Bales was never charged with anything as prosecutors claimed it was unclear who started the fight. Meanwhile, Bales was charged with a hit and run following the incident where he rolled his car, but was given a deferred 12-month sentence in order to pay a $250 fine. After this, the charge was dismissed. Bales' second military tour took place between June 2006 and September 2007, when the country was in the middle of a civil war between Iraqi security forces and members of the Soldiers of Heaven, the latter of which is described as an apocalyptic Muslim cult. During the conflict, 250 cult members died alongside 11 to 25 Iraqi security force members and 2 US soldiers. Reflecting on this particularly bloody dispute, Bales told the Northwest Guardian, a military newspaper, "I've never been more proud to be a part of this unit than that day, for the simple fact that we discriminated between the bad guys and the non-combatants, and then afterwards we ended up helping the people that 3 or 4 hours before were trying to kill us." Bales is referring here to the children and women whose wounds were tended to following the fight. He added, "I think that's the real difference between being an American as opposed to being a bad guy. Someone who puts his family in harm's way like that." Carey would later state that this conflict haunted him long after he came home. Specifically, one moment was burned into his brain, and he was unable to forget it. Carey stated, he saw this woman. The baby was dead in her arms, and she had a blanket over the body because it was cold that morning. A man who was injured came by and, seeing that the baby was dead, took the blanket from her so he could be warm. Adding to Bales' trauma was the fact that in the last few months of this tour, he spent time in Dora, an infamous neighborhood of Baghdad with a reputation for lawlessness, chaos, and violence. He recalled that an IED blew up a vehicle, killing the soldier inside. "It was pretty graphic, man," Bales told GQ. "The IED ripped through the bottom of the truck. The insides of the soldiers were just plastered up against the sides, you know." At the end of this tour, Bales was 34 and he wanted out. There are some reports that he injured his foot during this time, though it is unclear how, but he was determined to be fit for duty regardless. Furthermore, he was promoted to staff sergeant and handpicked to undergo sniper training, which made him decide to stay a little longer. He would later note that he regretted this decision. Bales' third tour, which took place over 10 months between 2009 and 2010, was, by all accounts, a quiet one. You'd be forgiven for thinking that Bales would enjoy this brief period of peace, given that he had wanted out of the military just a few years earlier. But he reportedly told a friend that the deployment was boring and pretty dumb, complaining about a lack of fighting. Around this time, Bales and his wife were beginning to have financial problems. The pair had been residing in a house in Auburn, a city located between Seattle and Tacoma, that Callie had owned before they met. But by 2009, the couple was struggling to make mortgage payments. They had missed $17,000 worth of payments and owed the bank almost $200,000. A trustee auction was scheduled for October 2009, by which time the couple had moved out, but it was postponed 3 times and called off in early 2010. It is unclear why. At the time of Bales' 2012 arrest, the house had lain dormant for 18 months. Neighbours noted that the couple didn't properly care for the property, which was left filthy and in need of repairs. Another property the couple owned had been purchased in 2005. However, in 2012, Callie told a real estate agent that she wanted to sell the house as they needed the money. The house went up for sale for $229,000, $50,000 less than what the couple had paid for it. After Bales' third tour, he finally sought help for his numerous problems, which included paranoia, trouble sleeping, enduring headaches, an explosive temper, and an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. An army doctor diagnosed him as having a mild traumatic brain injury, which is possibly the result of their vehicle being flipped after it was hit with an IED, but which also possibly dates back to his days playing football in high school. Furthermore, Bales was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Like many soldiers, he'd been dismissive of the idea that he may be suffering from PTSD, but at the urging of his wife and his doctor, he agreed to see a therapist. Bales gave up though, after just a few sessions, frustrated that the therapist he saw believed the anger he was feeling was a mask for something else. He later told an army judge, "The only thing I felt was weak, talking about my emotions. Where I am from, men don't talk like that. I told the PTSD doctor I was doing better, and he let me stop coming. Despite these new diagnoses, in December 2011, Bales was deployed once more. On the evening of March the 11th, 2012, after finishing his shift, Bales had 6 or 7 drinks while he and some of his fellow soldiers watched a movie. According to the Army's investigation, which began after his arrest, he spent the evening openly worrying about not getting the promotion he wanted, one which would afford him and his wife an extra £370 a month that they desperately needed. Due to their recent financial troubles, the couple's marriage had been strained, and Bales was worried about how not getting the promotion might affect their relationship. Bales also voiced anger that night for another soldier whose leg had been blown off the previous day, and about the leadership of the Green Berets, whom he felt were not aggressive enough given the string of recent assaults against US troops by the Taliban. As well as the alcohol coursing through his system, Bales had started taking steroids a few weeks earlier. The other soldiers who knew him speculated that his recent angry and unstable outbursts were a result of the stanozolol in his system. Shortly before midnight, Bales retired to his room and swallowed a handful of sleeping pills. He later told GQ, "You gotta understand, man, I probably hadn't slept since Wednesday. I just wanted to sleep that night. I just kept thinking about those guys that were out there, moving around at night, doing something. They're getting closer to the base, closing in on our position, trying to kill us." Bales was convinced that the Taliban were plotting another attack. Just before the end of his shift, while working guard duty, he believed he'd seen lights in the distance and that they were that of insurgents sending signals about an imminent assault. He reported his suspicions to the guard, who took over after him, but believing nobody was taking him seriously. As a result, he was paranoid. He was sure that something was coming, something big and violent. Since he wouldn't sleep, despite the sleeping pills, he took his concerns to the Green Beret sergeant in charge of liaising with the infantry. But Bales still didn't get the response he was after, recalling, "He kind of blew me off and told me to mind my own business." Bales went back to bed, but still he couldn't sleep. He subsequently got up, dressed in his combat gear and night vision goggles, prepared his weapons and left the base. He was able to get by because the soldiers who were meant to be on guard were asleep on the job. Bales went straight to the home of a village elder named Syed Jan in Alakozai, about half a mile away. Though Syed Jan was not home, his family was. His wife was herded, along with 2 grandchildren, into a separate room and told to drop to the floor and stay where they were. Though Syed Jan's wife fought with the soldier, Bales threw her to the ground and stomped on her, later claiming, "If someone's engaging with you while you're cleaning a room and they're a non-threat, you're going to push them down to the floor," which is what I did. In another room, there was a man, Syed Jan's cousin, sound asleep. Bales shot him at close range just after he heard the wife and the 2 grandchildren flee from the house. The soldier went after them, trailing their screams as they ran to a neighbour's property. A dog tried to attack him, so Bales fatally shot the animal. Later defending this action to GQ, Bales stated, "This isn't the United States of America. Fido isn't a family pet. Fido's there to warn that someone's coming." Bales subsequently bumped into another man, Nazir Mohammed, who was concerned about all the commotion and began beating him. When the man's child came running out, sobbing for their father, the soldier shot the child before killing Nazir. In his GQ interview, Bales expressed some regret for his actions, mostly in regard to shooting the child. He stated, "It was a quick reaction. I hate it. I hate it. Every day, I think about it all the time." After that, Bales said he began acting on autopilot. A group of women and children soon fled into the darkness, attempting to evade Bales and the light attached to his rifle. The group reached the house of an elderly man whose medication had allowed him to sleep through the racket. They woke him and he decided to leave his house to investigate, instructing the others to hide. As soon as the man came face to face with Bales, he was shot and killed. Inside, Bales killed Syed Jan's wife before spraying bullets that wounded 4 children, 2 of whom were hit in the skull but managed to survive their injuries. In an attempt to explain his actions, Bales later stated, "I was so angry at these guys, the men who own the homes, for putting their families in harm's way like that. You wouldn't have terrorists running to your house, bleeding. You wouldn't have people run to your house for aid, where you have your wife and children sleeping. You just wouldn't do it. To me, that's hard. That's really, really hard to comprehend. So I blamed them, but I took it out on the women and children. I was just raging. Bales was low on ammunition and opted to return to base at 1:40 a.m., 30 minutes after the massacre had started. Back at base, he reportedly told another soldier that he'd killed some military-aged males and that he was going to go back and finish it. Notably, there was only one person Bales had killed so far who was even close to military age. The other soldier believed Bales was sleepwalking and tried to go back to sleep himself, but Bales wouldn't leave him alone until he promised to look after his wife and children for him, to which the other soldier finally gave in and agreed. Bales grabbed a grenade belt, grenade launcher, and some more ammunition and headed back out. He went south this time, to Najabien, where he killed a man and threatened his wife by placing the barrel of his gun into the mouth of one of their children, a baby at the time. Fortunately, Bales didn't shoot. He left the home and proceeded to the next one, where he killed the family's dog and beat and stomped on several family members. One member was assaulted so viciously that its left hair and skin stuck to the wall. After the beatings, he set his rifle to burst fire and slaughtered all 8 people in the room. A couple was still alive in the next room, and he made sure to kill them too, after forcing them to lie on the floor where their deceased relatives lay. After this, the army reported that Bales poured kerosene from a nearby lantern on the bodies and set the room on fire. Bales, however, claims he did no such thing and suggested that he accidentally knocked over the lantern during the assault. On his way out of the home, he encountered an elderly woman named Shah Tarina. He shot her in the head with his pistol as his rifle was out of ammo, but she reportedly survived the shot. So Bales, according to military reports, crushed her skull with his boot, stomping on her with so much force that her face and head were mutilated, leaving her blood splattered on the walls of her son's home. He subsequently picked up her body and placed it in the room that was ablaze and filled with the bodies of her relatives. Finishing up the massacre, Bales stated that it finally hit me. He told GQ, "I think there's a point that, when it hits you, what you did. This is it. Everything you ever worked for, everything you ever loved, is now, in a matter of hours, destroyed." He claimed that he put the barrel of his gun in his mouth, but that he couldn't do it, especially when he began thinking of his children. Back in Alikozai, residents of the village desperately tried to get help. One man, the son of victim Mohammed Naim, managed to get a car where he loaded the injured survivors into a vehicle and drove to a larger US military outpost where they were treated for their wounds. One survivor was a teenage boy with a bullet in the back of his skull, while another was a teenage girl who was hit in the groin and the chest and refused to be treated until a female medic arrived. Meanwhile, soldiers at Camp Belamby were searching for Staff Sergeant Bales, whom was known to be missing. At 4:47 a.m, he arrived back at the base. His 2 squad leaders, including Sergeant Jason McClacken, the man he'd earlier told that he'd killed numerous military-aged males, turned their weapons on him. Bales's weapons were taken from him and he was turned over to the Green Berets. For 8 hours, Bales bounced between sorrowful confessions and feeble attempts to obstruct the investigation. He refused to answer when asked whose blood was on his clothing, and when he was brought his laptop as he asked, he reportedly smashed the device up. Following his arrest, Bales was moved out of Afghanistan, much to the upset and anger of their government and civilians who wanted him to pay for the atrocities he'd committed. On March the 16th, he was flown from Kuwait to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where he was held in isolation, but was able to leave his cell for hygiene and recreational purposes. A week later, he was charged with 17 counts of murder, 6 counts of attempted murder, and 6 counts of assault. Other charges soon followed, including abuse of steroids, alcohol consumption, and attempting to destroy evidence. Bales was defended by John Henry Brown, whom he told right away that he had wanted out of the army and did not want to be sent for a 4th deployment. Brown believed and planned to argue that Bales broke under the pressure of his final deployment, noting that he had a history of mental health issues and was not in his right mind when he committed his crimes. A neuropsychologist wrote a report on Bales for the defense and stated, "Part of PTSD is dissociation. The person feels like he's watching himself or outside himself. He's not himself. And head trauma, we don't have a lot of research on that, but head trauma may exacerbate that tendency to dissolve when under stress. Notably, there have been issues at Fort Lewis, or Joint Base Lewis McChord, for decades, with many allegations emerging over the years which claim that the base has a history of downgrading the diagnosis of soldiers with PTSD to lesser ailments and subsequently going ahead with deployment. Base commanders have also been accused of not giving troops sufficient time to recover from one deployment before sending them on another. Furthermore, the base's medical unit is said to be frequently understaffed and not equipped to deal with a large number of soldiers returning from deployment with trauma and mental health problems. In the years leading up to the Kandahar Massacre, several soldiers from the base committed horrific crimes. In April 2011, one soldier killed his wife and son before taking his own life, while 4 members of a platoon from the base's 5th Striker Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division, were convicted for murdering 3 unarmed Afghan civilians. In January 2012, another murdered a park ranger. In 2 separate incidents, soldiers have been charged with waterboarding their own children. The executive director of a nearby Veterans Resource Centre said at the time of the massacre, "This was not a rogue soldier. JBLM is a rogue base with a severe leadership problem." Dr. Stephen Xenakis, a psychiatrist and retired Brigadier General, echoed similar sentiments about the case, believing that Bales was representative of a larger problem, that overworked troops, after over a decade of combat, were not being adequately cared for, either physically or mentally, by the military. He added, "The army will want to say that soldiers who commit crimes are rogues, that they are individual, isolated cases, but they are not." Bales's lawyer soon realised that his strategy would not work. His client's fate was in the hands of the military justice system, and he suspected that 6 military jurors would not believe his mental health defence, or that the military should take some responsibility for what happened on March the 11th, 2012. He told Bales that he should plead guilty in exchange for the prosecution dropping the death penalty. After months of back and forth, it was eventually agreed. In June 2013, Bales pleaded guilty to 16 counts of murder, 6 counts of attempted murder, and 7 counts of assault with a dangerous weapon, and was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was also demoted to the lowest enlisted rank, dishonourably discharged, and forfeited all pay and allowances. Bales sought a pardon from then President Donald Trump in 2020, but was not given it. He is currently imprisoned at the US disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. In 2015, Bales was working towards finishing his university degree and was training up to work in the prison barbershop, where he would earn $1 an hour, cutting the hair of fellow inmates. He also began following the Christian faith after being baptized. Following his arrest, his wife and children were moved onto the army base to avoid the media as much as possible. At the time of the writing of this documentary, it seems that Carrie is still married to Bales. As of 2015, she was taking the children to see their father as often as possible. Bales believes that he was looking that night for the Taliban, but concedes that he may not have been in his right mind, noting, "Was I in some kind of trance? I'm still baffled by it." He has stated often that he would like to apologise to his fellow soldiers and squad members, the people he believes he truly let down that night, but does not appear to have ever offered an apology to his victims, as meagre as that might be. GQ writer Brendan Vaughan reacted out to some of the victims while writing up his piece on Bales. One of the survivors, a teenage boy who was shot in both thighs, walks with a cane. He was fearful that he would never be able to find a wife due to his disability. His sister, who was shot in the back of the head and was mostly non-responsive when she was tended to by medics after the slaughter, has almost no use of her right arm and leg. Mohammed Wazir, who lost 11 members of his family that night, including 6 of his 7 children, his wife and his mother, moved to Kandahar and opened a store. The survivors of the atrocities were given $10,000 each, while $50,000 each went to families of the deceased. Following his arrest, fellow soldiers sent letters to Bales' defence attorneys, describing him as a man who, after a decade of military service in which he witnessed the murder and maiming of his peers, had succumbed to a darkness that swallowed him whole. But still, Bales himself has struggled to explain his actions beyond noting that he's gone on autopilot and that he lost compassion for those who weren't American. After his conviction, he wrote to the senior army officer at JBLM requesting a lesser sentence. He stated, "My mind was consumed by war. I planted war and hate for the better part of 10 years and harvested violence. After being in prison 2 years, I understand that what I thought was normal was the farthest thing from being normal." In part of his conclusion about why he carried out the attacks, he wrote, "I have come to understand there isn't a why. There is only pain."